The state of perfect Saturday. Zen is a fragile thing. It's a delicate ecosystem balanced on cheap sunglasses, the right podcast, and a can of soda that's sweating more than you are. For a glorious 17 minutes, I had achieved it. Here I was, Alex, a 32-year-old man who had just signed away his soul for a mortgage in Oak Haven Estates, a neighborhood so committed to the color beige it was practically a cult. I was poolside, horizontal on a slightly sticky lounge chair, and the most stressful decision on my horizon was whether to reapply sunscreen. Life was good. The community pool was the neighborhood's crown jewel, a kidney bean-shaped oasis amidst a sea of oppressively identical houses. It was a chaotic symphony of suburban life. The shriek of a kid named Brayden as he executed another flawless cannonball, the sizzle of a burger on the communal grill being captained by a dad in New Balance sneakers, the low hum of gossip from a trio of moms discussing the new yoga studio. I'd only been here a month, still living out of boxes, and this was my first real foray into the local culture. It was fine. Then, the ecosystem was shattered. A pristine, pearl-white Lexus SUV, the kind of vehicle that costs more than my college education, purred up the access road. But it didn't turn into one of the dozen empty parking spots. Oh no, that would be for the common folk. It glided to a stop directly on top of the bright red 2-foot-wide letters that screamed "No Parking Fire Lane." The curb itself was painted the angriest shade of red I'd ever seen. A blind man could feel that it was a fire lane. The driver's side door opened, and a woman emerged. She was probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand a Category 3 hurricane, and sunglasses so large they could have been used to signal ships at sea. She was decked out in Lululemon from head to toe, a uniform that suggested intense physical activity, but a demeanor that promised none. This, I would soon learn, was Carol. She popped the trunk and began unloading an arsenal of poolside equipment, a cooler on wheels, 4 folding chairs, a giant rainbow-colored umbrella, and an inflatable flamingo that was at least 50% larger than I was. She was building a beachhead, establishing a permanent settlement. A guy I recognized from a few houses down, a young dad with a toddler attached to his leg, cautiously approached her. Excuse me," he said, pointing with a half-eaten fruit snack. "You can't park there. That's the fire lane." Carol glanced at him, then at her chariot, then back at him, as if he'd just suggested the sky was plaid. "Oh, it's perfectly fine," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending sweetness you'd use on a child who just asked if he could eat dirt. "I'm on the HOA board. I'll only be a minute." My eyes narrowed behind my sunglasses. An unofficial royal decree. The laws of man and the municipal fire code had been temporarily suspended by the authority of Her Majesty, Queen Carol of the cul-de-sac. The dad, clearly not wanting a confrontation, just shrugged and retreated to the safety of the splash pad. I watched the clock on my phone. Her minute was a fascinatingly fluid concept. 1 minute passed, then 5. She finished unloading, dragged her mountain of gear through the gate, and began meticulously arranging it in a prime location, displacing a family of 4 in the process. 10 minutes. She was now applying sunscreen with the focused intensity of a surgeon. 15. The flamingo was being inflated. This wasn't just a minor infraction, it was a declaration. It was a statement that the rules, those silly little guidelines for the plebs, did not apply to her. My burgeoning sense of neighborhood tranquility was curdling into righteous indignation. I'd worked in IT support for 10 years. My entire career was built on calmly explaining to people why the rules they thought they were above actually existed for a reason. But a direct confrontation was not my style. That's how you end up in a shouting match and become the neighborhood crazy person. No, my approach was rooted in the beautiful, elegant art of malicious compliance. I didn't want to be the enforcer. I wanted the system to do the enforcing. I stood up, stretched, and ambled over to the lifeguard stand. A kid who couldn't have been older than 19 sat perched on the throne, spinning his whistle on a lanyard. He had that classic teenage combination of boredom and absolute authority. His name tag read Josh Headguard. "Hey, Josh," I said casually. He looked down, his eyes hidden behind polarized Oakleys. "Hey. Quick question for you. Not a complaint, just curious," I began, keeping my tone light. "If there was, say, a fire over at the clubhouse, or if a resident had a medical emergency over here and the paramedics needed to roll a gurney in, how important is it that they have immediate, unobstructed access to that fire lane?" Josh stopped spinning his whistle. His posture straightened. He was no longer a bored teenager. He was the head guard. "It's critical, sir," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "It's a zero-tolerance zone. We're trained to clear it immediately. Any obstruction is a major safety and liability issue for the association." "Got it. Liability. Makes sense," I said. Then, I gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards the gleaming white Lexus. "Just wanted to make sure I understood the rules." Josh's head swiveled. He saw the SUV. His eyes narrowed. He saw Carol, now comfortably reclined under her umbrella. He put the whistle to his lips and blew 3 sharp, piercing blasts. Fweet! 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 The entire pool fell silent. Every head turned. Josh grabbed a red windbreaker with Lifeguard Chief printed on the back, a garment that probably existed solely for moments like this, and descended from his throne. He marched with the unhurried purpose of a man who knows he has the full weight of rules, regulations, and insurance policies on his side. The confrontation was short, brutal, and beautiful to behold. "Ma'am," Josh said, his voice calm but firm, "you'll have to move your vehicle immediately." Carol looked up, annoyed at the interruption to her sunbathing. "And you are?" "I'm the head lifeguard, ma'am, and you're parked in a designated fire lane. It needs to be cleared." She tried to play her trump card. "I'm Carol Peterson. I'm on the HOA board." Josh didn't even blink. It was magnificent. "I don't care if you're the mayor, ma'am. That's a fire lane. The pool rules, which the HOA board approved, are very clear. I can have the vehicle towed at your expense if it's not moved in the next 5 minutes." Carol's jaw dropped. She looked around for support, but all she saw were dozens of neighbors suddenly fascinated by their towels or the contents of their coolers. She had been publicly checkmated by a teenager in a windbreaker. Fuming, she let out a huff that seemed to deflate the giant flamingo next to her. She began the laborious process of packing everything back up, her movements jerky with anger. She had to haul her cooler, her chairs, and her limp flamingo of shame back to the SUV, load it all up, and then perform a drive of shame to a legitimate parking spot at the far end of the lot. As she passed the gate, her eyes met mine. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a laser-guided death glare, a silent promise of future retribution. I just smiled, gave her a friendly little 2-finger wave, and settled back into my lounge chair. My zen was gone, replaced by something far more exhilarating. The sweet, satisfying taste of petty victory. I had a feeling my quiet life in Oakhaven Estates was officially over. The pool incident faded into the background as the reality of homeownership set in. My weekends were no longer about relaxation. They were about assembling IKEA furniture, trying to figure out which light switch controlled what, and discovering the previous owner's questionable DIY projects. My main focus, however, was the backyard. It was a sad, barren rectangle of patchy grass and disappointment. It was the reason I'd bought this specific house. It was a blank canvas. And I had a masterpiece in mind. I called it, in the privacy of my own head, the Deck of Destiny. This wasn't going to be some simple 10x10 pressure-treated platform. No, this was going to be an extension of my living space. I envisioned a sprawling, multi-level construction made of rich, low-maintenance composite decking, maybe a Trex in a warm, spiced rum color. The main level would be for dining, with plenty of space for a table and chairs. A step down would lead to a lounge area with built-in benches and planters. To one side, a dedicated grilling station, a culinary command center where I could finally graduate from my rusty old kettle grill to a proper built-in gas model. And arching over the lounge area, a handsome cedar pergola, ready for string lights and, eventually, climbing vines. And the crown jewel, the pièce de résistance, a slightly sunken, top-of-the-line hot tub. I could already picture it, sitting in the bubbling water on a cool autumn evening, a cold beer in hand, staring up at the stars. This deck wasn't just a project, it was the dream. I spent the next 2 weeks obsessively designing it. I downloaded SketchUp and taught myself how to use it, creating a detailed 3D model. I researched building codes, joist spacing, and concrete footing requirements. I was genuinely, passionately excited. This was my house, my little patch of the American dream, and I was going to make it perfect. Then I discovered the snag, the dragon guarding the treasure. Tucked away in the mountain of paperwork I'd received at closing was a thick, spiral-bound document titled Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association, Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. I'd ignored it until now, assuming it was just boilerplate about not painting your house neon green or raising livestock. I flipped through it, looking for the section on exterior modifications. And there it was, Section 8, Architectural Control. My blood ran cold. Any exterior alteration, from a new mailbox to a garden shed, had to be submitted for approval to the Architectural Review Committee, ARC. The document was a masterpiece of vague, subjective language. Plans had to be harmonious with the overall aesthetic of the community. Materials had to be of a quality and character that is consistent with the neighborhood. It was a minefield of potential denials based on nothing more than the whims of the committee members. With a sinking heart, I filled out the application form, attached my beautiful, professional-looking 3D renderings, and a detailed list of materials. I emailed it to the generic HOA dashboard at oakhaven.org address and waited. A week later, I received a summons. My project would be reviewed at the next monthly ARC meeting. Attendance was strongly encouraged. The meeting was held in the Community Center Clubhouse, in a multi-purpose room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and institutional despair. The walls were, of course, beige. The fluorescent lighting hummed with an almost aggressive monotony. I was the only person in attendance who wasn't eligible for a senior discount. At the front of the room, behind a folding table, sat the committee. 2 elderly men who looked like they were seconds away from nodding off, and a woman seated in the center. It was Carol. Of course it was Carol. She was no longer in her Lululemon battle armor. Tonight she wore a sensible blazer and a string of pearls, the uniform of a petty bureaucrat. She looked at me as I walked in, and I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a tightening at the corners of her mouth. She remembered the guy from the pool. Next on the agenda, she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the empty room, is the application for 114 Willow Creek Lane, a deck proposal. She said the word deck like it was a contagious disease. I stood up and gave my presentation. I was polite, professional. I walked them through the design, highlighted the high-quality materials, explained how it would increase the property value, and assured them it met all city building codes. The 2 old guys nodded along, looking at the renderings with what seemed like mild approval. I finished and looked at Carol. She hadn't once looked at the detailed plans in front of her. She had her fingers steepled, a smug, unreadable expression on her face. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Alex," I said. "Alex," she repeated slowly. "The committee has some concerns." "Here we go." "First," she began, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the application form, "the proposed height of your pergola exceeds the guidelines for secondary structures. It will obstruct the sightlines of your neighbors. My nearest neighbor is 50 feet away and separated by a line of mature pine trees," I countered, "and the plans show it's only 9 feet tall, well within city code." "The city code is a baseline, Alex. Oakhaven has its own higher standards," she said, the condescension back in full force. "Furthermore, the composite decking color, spiced rum, is not on our pre-approved list of colors." "What is on the pre-approved list?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It showed 3 color swatches: pebble gray, khaki, and something called grage, the holy trinity of boring. "And finally," she said, leaning back in her chair for the kill shot, "a hot tub is simply out of the question. They're noisy, they're a potential liability, and frankly, they are an eyesore that detracts from the family-friendly aesthetic we strive to maintain." My jaw clenched. "It's a brand new model. It's virtually silent. It would be behind a 6-foot privacy fence. No one would even see it." "The committee's decision is final," she said, looking to the 2 men beside her, who both suddenly seemed very interested in the ceiling tiles. They gave weak, non-committal nods. "Your application is denied as submitted. You are welcome to resubmit a revised plan that is more in keeping with the community's character." I stood there for a moment, stunned. It was a complete, unambiguous shutdown. This wasn't about sightlines or the color of my deck. This was about the pool. This was payback. She was the queen in her beige castle, and I was the peasant who had dared to question her authority. I gathered my beautiful plans, now feeling like a stack of useless paper, and walked out of that depressing room without another word. The war for the deck of destiny had officially begun. For 2 days, I stewed. I paced my empty backyard, glaring at the patch of dirt where my deck was supposed to be. I cursed Carol, the HOA, and the entire concept of community aesthetic. My first instinct was to just build the damn thing anyway and deal with the fines. My second, more rational thought was that they could probably put a lien on my house and make my life a living hell. Giving up wasn't an option. The deck of destiny had become a matter of principle. So on the 3rd day, I declared war. But my war wouldn't be fought with defiance, it would be fought with bureaucracy. She wanted to use the rulebook against me? Fine. I was going to become a scholar of that rulebook. I was going to weaponize it. I printed out all 200 pages of the Oakhaven Estate's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I bought a fresh pack of highlighters, a set of colored sticky tabs, and a case of energy drinks. My dining room table, previously a repository for junk mail, became my command center. For the next 2 weeks, I lived and breathed that document. It was a journey into the heart of suburban madness. The level of detail was breathtakingly absurd. There was a full page, with diagrams, dedicated to acceptable mailbox designs and post materials, cedar or pressure-treated pine, 4x4 inches, no less than 36 inches, and no more than 42 inches above ground level. There was a clause, 12.7c, that dictated that all garden gnomes must not exceed 18 inches in height. Holiday decorations could not be erected more than 30 days prior to the holiday and must be removed within 15 days after. But in that dense forest of insane rules, I started finding pathways, loopholes, contradictions, vague phrases that were open to interpretation. The document was written by lawyers, but it had been amended and added to over decades by committees of amateurs, creating a patchwork of exploitable weaknesses. For example, while the rules for decks and patios were subjective, the rules for accessory structures, sheds, gazebos, etc., had very specific, objective height and size limits. A pergola wasn't a deck feature, it was a freestanding, open-air gazebo-style shade structure. The rules didn't say anything about hot tubs, but there was a section on pools and water features that was surprisingly lenient, clearly written in the 1980s, before anyone had heard of a hydrotherapy spa. The more I read, the more a new plan began to form. A plan so ridiculously, meticulously compliant that they couldn't possibly deny it. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed a contractor. I needed an ally. My search began. My first call was to a guy my realtor had vaguely recommended, Shady Steve of Steve's Decks and Stuff. He came over in a beat-up pickup truck that looked like it ran on rust and optimism. He gave my backyard a cursory glance, chewed on a toothpick, and scribbled a number on the back of a gas station receipt. It was suspiciously low. "So here's the deal," I said. "The HOA is difficult." Steve let out a short, barking laugh. "You mean that blonde lady in the white Lexus? Carol? Yeah, she's a real piece of work. Had a run-in with her last year over a fence job. Nightmare." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Look, for an extra $1,000, cash, my guys and I can just do it on a weekend. We'll be in and out. What she don't know won't hurt her." I imagined waking up to a half-finished, crooked deck and a lien on my house. "Thanks, Steve. I'll let you know." He knew he wasn't getting the job. Next was Artisan Antoine, whose website was full of black and white photos of minimalist Japanese-inspired gardens. He arrived in a Prius, wearing a linen shirt and carrying a leather portfolio. He looked at my detailed 3D renderings with a pained expression, as if I'd shown him a crime scene photo. "I see what you are. Attempting here," he said, his voice soft and judgmental. "But this is very aggressive. The energy is all wrong. Have you considered, instead of this bulky structure, a meditative flagstone path leading to a single, contemplative weeping willow? We could create a space for reflection, not recreation." "I'm looking to reflect on how great it is to sit in a hot tub with a beer," I said. Antoine winced. A hot tub would disrupt the entire flow of the chi. I thanked him for his time and his concern for my chi. I was starting to lose hope. My final call was to a company I'd found online with stellar reviews and a no-nonsense name. Built Right Construction. The next day, a solid-looking Ford F-250 pulled up, and a man in his 50s with a short, military-style haircut and a firm handshake introduced himself as Mike. He looked like he ate nails for breakfast and washed them down with coffee that could dissolve steel. I decided to lay all my cards on the table. I told him everything. The dream, the denial, the pool incident, Carol. I showed him my plans, and then I showed him my annotated, highlighted, sticky-tabbed copy of the HOA bylaws. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he picked up the thick binder of rules and flipped through it, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Son," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I spent 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. I've built bases in countries with more bureaucracy than this, but I'll tell you two things I can't stand: shoddy workmanship and bullies. This here," he patted the binder, "is a bully's playbook, and I love nothing more than beating a bully using their own rules." I felt a surge of hope. "So you'll take the job?" "Hell yes, I'll take the job," he boomed. "Let's build your deck. We're gonna do it by the book. Her book. Every single stupid, glorious letter." For the next week, Mike and I huddled in my dining room, which he now called the War Room. We became a two-man legal and engineering team. We redesigned the entire project, not based on what looked best, but on what was most legally unimpeachable according to the Oakhaven bylaws. The pergola was officially redesignated as a freestanding shade arbor, and we lowered its maximum height by 1/4 of an inch to 8 feet 11.75 inches, just to be safe. We scrapped the spiced rum decking. Instead, we found a clause that allowed for materials that blend 2 or more approved colors. Mike found a manufacturer that made a variegated board that swirled pebble gray and khaki together. It was ugly as sin, but it was compliant. The grilling station became a masonry food preparation area, for which there were no rules at all. And the hot tub? That was my masterpiece. I found a clause in the health and safety section about reasonable accommodations for medical necessities. I went to a walk-in clinic, complained about back pain from my desk job, and walked out with a doctor's note recommending regular hydrotherapy. The hot tub was now a prescribed therapeutic hydrotherapy spa. We put together the new application. It was a work of art, a 50-page behemoth of malicious compliance. It included new architectural drawings, city permit applications, engineering specs for the spa, material samples of the hideous decking, my doctor's note, and a 10-page cover letter that cited the specific bylaw, page number, and subclause that justified every single element of the design. It was so thorough, so dense, so utterly and completely by the book that a team of lawyers couldn't have found a reason to deny it. With a deep sense of satisfaction, I attached the massive PDF to an email addressed to the HOA board. I typed a simple subject line: Revised application for 114 Willow Creek Lane. Then I clicked send. The ball was in her court. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of my life. I checked my email every 15 minutes, expecting a rejection full of some new invented rule. I saw Carol's white Lexus drive past my house slowly on 3 separate occasions, a vehicular drive-by of pure intimidation. But then, one Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was curt: application status. The body of the email was even colder: Dear Mr. last name, the Architectural Review Committee has reviewed your revised application. While the committee finds the scale of the project to be excessive for a property of your size, the submitted plans appear to be in technical compliance with the current CC and ours. Your project is therefore approved. Please note that all construction must adhere strictly to the submitted plans and all relevant community guidelines regarding noise, debris, and working hours. The committee will be monitoring the construction closely to ensure full compliance. Sincerely, the Oakhaven ARC. I read it 3 times. Technical compliance. Monitoring closely. The words were dripping with venom. It wasn't an approval, it was a threat. She couldn't stop me, so she was going to watch my every move, just waiting for me to make a mistake. I forwarded the email to Mike with a 1-word message: Game on. His reply came 2 minutes later. Excellent. My crew will be there Monday, 7:59. That following Monday, at precisely 7:59 a.m., a small army descended on Willow Creek Lane. Mike's big F-250 led the charge, followed by a flatbed truck carrying a mini-excavator and a lumber truck stacked high with our hideously compliant decking. A team of 4 guys, all looking as professional and no-nonsense as Mike, began unloading tools with quiet efficiency. At 8 a.m. on the dot, the roar of the mini-excavator's engine split the morning silence as it began digging the first footing. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The siege began less than an hour later. My phone buzzed with an email from Carol. Subject: formal complaint, construction noise violation, Alex. It is 8:02 a.m., and your construction crew has already begun operating heavy machinery. As per bylaw 14.2, construction noise is not permitted before 8 a.m. I have photographic evidence that your crew began work prematurely. Please ensure your contractors adhere to the established hours. I walked outside, phone in hand, and showed the email to Mike. He didn't even look annoyed. He simply pulled his own phone from his pocket, which was displaying a large, official-looking clock synced to the atomic time server. "It was 8 a.m. on the dot," he grunted. "Tell her to calibrate her watch." I replied to her email, attaching a screenshot of the atomic clock. "Carol, thanks for the note. We are monitoring the time closely to ensure compliance. All work began at 8 a.m. or later." That was just the first volley. Carol's campaign of petty harassment was relentless, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. On day 3, we got another email. Subject: complaint, unapproved temporary structures. She claimed the crew's blue porta potty was an unapproved temporary structure, and that its placement violated a setback rule from the property line. I spent my lunch break combing through the bylaws. I found the rule she was referencing, but it applied to sheds and gazebos, not temporary facilities for contractors, which were covered in a different section. We were, in fact, in the only spot on the property where the porta potty was permitted to be. I replied with the relevant bylaw number and page citation. The porta potty stayed. On day 5, she escalated. Subject: urgent. Property damage. She claimed that one of Mike's work trucks had leaked oil on the pristine asphalt of our community street, a finable offense. Mike, who had clearly fought this battle before, had anticipated this. From day 1, he had made his crew place huge, flattened cardboard sheets under every single vehicle, every single day. The street in front of my house was cleaner than any other on the block. I took a photo of the spotless asphalt under the trucks and sent it to her. "Carol, we share your concern for the community's appearance. As you can see, we have taken extensive preventative measures." Each complaint was a new challenge, and each successful defense was a small victory. My backyard became a fortress. Mike and I were the co-generals, his crew our loyal soldiers. We had a laminated copy of the bylaws pinned up inside the garage, which we now called the Rules of Engagement. The crew got into it, mockingly asking for permission to use certain tools based on their decibel levels and keeping a meticulous log of their start and end times. Carol's surveillance was constant. I'd see the curtains twitch in her front window, which had a direct line of sight to my property. She'd take her dog for a walk 5 times a day, always pausing at the edge of my lawn to scrutinize the work. Her presence was a constant, oppressive force. But with every passing day, the deck of destiny rose from the dirt, a magnificent, multicolored monument to our stubbornness. The footings were poured, the frame went up, and the first rows of the swirly gray and khaki decking were laid down. It was happening, and she was powerless to stop it. I knew she wouldn't give up. A person like Carol doesn't just accept defeat. She was being beaten at her own game, and that was unforgivable. She was running out of petty complaints. I could feel her getting more and more desperate. She was going to do something drastic. I just didn't know what. The deck was about 75% complete. The main structure was finished, the the freestanding shade arbor, was up, and the ugly but compliant decking was fully installed. Mike's crew was working on the built-in benches and the final trim. It looked incredible. A testament to what you can achieve with a healthy dose of spite and an encyclopedic knowledge of local ordinances. I was starting to actually like the weird, swirly color of the deck boards. It was the color of victory. But the relative quiet on the Carol front was unnerving. For 3 straight days, there had been no emails, no slow drive-bys, no lingering inspections during her dog walks. It was the calm before the storm. I knew she was planning something big. A person who builds their identity around enforcing rules can't stand to lose. She had exhausted all her ammunition from the HOA playbook. It was time for her to call in outside firepower. The storm broke on a Thursday afternoon. I was on a work call in my home office when I saw it. First, a city-branded sedan from the Code Enforcement Department parked in front of my house. A man with a clipboard got out and started taking pictures. My heart hammered in my chest. Had we missed something? A city rule that superseded the HOA? Before I could even process that, a police cruiser pulled up and parked behind the code enforcement car. 2 officers got out, their expressions a perfect blend of boredom and annoyance. This was it. The nuclear option. She had called the cops. I ended my meeting abruptly and walked outside, trying to project an aura of calm I absolutely did not feel. Mike saw the commotion and came around from the backyard, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's all this?" he grunted, nodding towards the assembly of officialdom on my lawn. "I think this is what they call escalation," I said. Carol was there, of course. She was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, looking triumphant. She was talking to one of the officers, pointing animatedly at my house, at the construction, at the sky. She was probably telling him the deck was disrupting flight patterns for migratory birds. The officer, a tall man whose name tag read Sergeant Miller, listened patiently, then walked over to us, his partner following a few steps behind. The code enforcement guy, a harried-looking man named Dave, joined them. "Afternoon," Sergeant Miller said, his voice flat. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am, Alex," I said, extending a hand. He shook it briefly. "This is my contractor, Mike." "We received a call about a possible disturbance," the officer began, his eyes scanning the quiet work site where the crew had respectfully paused their work. "And another call to code enforcement about some unpermitted construction that allegedly violates multiple city ordinances." He gestured vaguely toward Carol, who was watching us like a hawk. "The reporting party seems to think you're building an illegal commercial structure back there." "A commercial structure?" I repeated, letting a hint of disbelief into my voice. "It's a deck." Mike, ever the professional, stepped forward. "Officers, Inspector, we have all our permits in order. Everything is being built precisely to code and to the approved plans." This was the moment I had been preparing for, though I had hoped it would never come. "If you'll give me 1 second," I said politely. I went back inside and returned with it. A thick, 3-inch, 3-ring binder with a neatly printed label on the spine. 114 Willow Creek Deck Project. I called it the Binder of Truth. I opened it on the hood of my car. It was beautiful. Every document was in a separate plastic sleeve, organized by color-coded tabs. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath. "Tab 1, in blue, you'll find our approved building permit from the city, signed and dated. Tab 2, in green, is the site plan, also approved. Tab 3 contains the electrical permit for the spa wiring. Tab 4, in yellow, is the official approval letter from the Homeowners Association's Architectural Review Committee for this exact design." I then flipped to the back. And just for context, Tab 5, in red, is a full copy of the HOA bylaws that the design is based on, with all the relevant clauses we used for compliance highlighted. Sergeant Miller and the code inspector, Dave, leaned in. They looked at the official city stamps on the permits. They looked at the signed HOA letter. They looked at the detailed blueprints. I saw Dave, the inspector, nod slightly. He recognized his own department's paperwork. He knew it was legit. Sergeant Miller looked up from the binder, then over at me, then back at Carol, who was starting to look less triumphant and more anxious. A tiny, almost imperceptible sigh escaped the officer's lips. He'd seen this movie before. This was just another pointless neighborhood squabble wasting his time. "Everything appears to be in order here," he said, his voice carrying across the lawn. He handed the binder back to me. He then walked over to Carol, his partner flanking him. We couldn't hear everything they said, but the tone was clear. We caught phrases like civil matter, All permits are valid, and please don't waste department resources." The code inspector, Dave, gave us a weary smile. "Looks like you guys are doing everything by the book," he said to Mike. "Sorry for the interruption. You know how it is." "We do," Mike said with a nod. The public shaming was complete. In full view of at least 3 other neighbors who were now pretending to check their mail, Carol was being officially told by the police to stand down. Her ultimate weapon had been a dud. She couldn't argue with the city permits. She couldn't argue with the police. Her face went from pale to beet red. Without another word, she turned on her heel and practically stormed back into her house. The front door slammed shut with a satisfying thud. The officers got back in their cruiser and left. Dave got in his car and left. The show was over. A quiet fell over the worksite. Then, one of Mike's guys, a young carpenter named Luis, let out a low whistle. "Damn," he said. "That was intense." Mike just clapped me on the shoulder. "That, my friend," he said with a grin, "is what you call checkmate." A week later, it was done. The last screw was drilled, the last board was cut, and the last speck of sawdust was swept away. The deck of destiny was no longer a dream, a blueprint, or a construction site. It was real, and it was glorious. It was a sprawling, magnificent beast of a deck. The ugly but compliant decking actually looked fantastic now that it was all laid out, the swirly gray and khaki pattern giving it a unique, almost rustic character. The freestanding shade arbor cast lovely shadows across the lounge area. The built-in benches were sturdy, the planters were ready for flowers, and the masonry food preparation area looked like it belonged on a cooking show. And nestled in the corner, steaming gently in the late afternoon sun, the prescribed therapeutic hydrotherapy spa was bubbling away, a beacon of victory. I had survived the HOA. I had won the war. But a victory isn't real until you celebrate it. I needed to christen the deck, to fill it with life and laughter. I needed to throw a party. Not just any party. A neighborhood-wide welcome to my deck of spite and triumph BBQ. I made up some simple invitations, and over the next few days, I walked the neighborhood and handed them out personally. I invited everyone on our block and the adjoining cul-de-sac. The reception was overwhelmingly positive. People had watched the entire saga unfold from their windows. They'd seen the non-stop construction, Carol's constant surveillance, and the grand finale with the police. I was the guy who had stood up to the HOA dragon and won. They were all eager to see the spoils of war. I invited everyone, that is, except Carol. Her house got a wide berth. The day of the party was perfect, sunny and warm, with a light breeze. I fired up the new grill for the first time. Mike and his entire crew came, and I made them the guests of honor. The neighbors started arriving right on time, bearing side dishes and six-packs. Kids immediately took over the lawn, and adults flocked to the deck, marveling at the sheer scale of it. "Wow, so this is it," said the young dad from the pool, shaking my head with a grin. "The deck that launched 1,000 angry emails. It's amazing." Mr. Henderson, an old retiree from across the street, clapped me on the back. "Good for you, son. That woman has been running this neighborhood like her own little fiefdom for 20 years. It's about time someone showed some backbone." The party was a roaring success. The air was filled with the smell of grilled burgers, the sound of classic rock on the portable speaker, and the happy chatter of neighbors who were finally getting to know each other. My deck wasn't just a structure, it was a community hub. Around 7 p.m., just as the sun was starting to set, she appeared. Like a ghost at the feast, Carol materialized at the edge of my property line. She wasn't shouting, not yet. She was just standing there, arms crossed, radiating an aura of pure, concentrated rage. The party didn't stop, but a ripple of awareness spread through the crowd. The dragon had emerged from her lair. She marched up my driveway and stood at the base of the deck stairs, her eyes scanning the crowd of happy, law-breaking revelers. She zeroed in on me. "Alex," she said, her voice tight and strained, "this is an unapproved social gathering." I took a bite of a cheeseburger and chewed thoughtfully before replying. "Actually, Carol, it's a BBQ. Pretty sure they're approved." "The noise levels are in clear violation of the 9 p.m. ordinance," she snapped. I glanced at my watch. "It's 7:15. We're good for another hour and 45 minutes. Can I help you with something else?" "Your guests' cars are lining the street. That's a parking violation." "Nope," I said, holding up a piece of paper. "Distributed a parking map to all my guests, as per bylaw 19.4, outlining all the legal street parking zones. We're fully compliant. Would you like a burger?" "Oh, wait." I feigned a look of disappointment. "You're not on the guest list." That was it, the final indignity, her face contorted with fury. She was about to unleash a tirade to really let loose, but before she could, something incredible happened. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, holding a plastic cup of beer. "Oh, leave the kid alone, Carol," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's the nicest party this street has had since the block party in '98, the one you shut down because the potluck dishes weren't aesthetically uniform." A woman I recognized from down the street, a mom of 3, chimed in. "Yeah, my kids are having a blast. This is a lot more fun than you leaving a fine on my door because their sidewalk chalk drawings were unapproved permanent alterations." Suddenly, the floodgates opened. Another neighbor spoke up. "You made me rip out my rose bushes because they weren't on the approved shrubbery list." "You tried to fine me because my garbage can was visible from the street for an hour too long." "You told me my welcome mat was too colorful." One by one, my neighbors, my guests, formed a loose, protective circle. They weren't yelling or being aggressive. They were just calmly, collectively airing 2 decades of pent-up grievances. They were sharing their stories of petty tyranny, of fines for bird feeders and warnings for wind chimes. Carol stood there, stunned into silence. She was surrounded. These weren't rules she could cite or authorities she could call. This was her community, the people she supposedly served. And they were unanimously, unequivocally telling her that she was the problem. Her power, which was built on intimidation and the assumption that no one would dare challenge her, evaporated in the warm evening air. She looked from face to face, searching for an ally, and found none. Her expression crumbled from anger to shock, and finally to utter defeat. Without another word, she turned and walked away, not with the powerful stride of an HOA president, but with the slumped shoulders of a deposed queen. A moment of silence hung in the air, and then someone started clapping. The whole party erupted in spontaneous applause. I looked around at my neighbors, at Mike and his crew, all of them smiling. I lifted my beer in a toast. The BBQ of Justice was a resounding success. The party became the stuff of local legend. It was dubbed the Great Deck Uprising of Willow Creek Lane. In the weeks that followed, the change in the neighborhood was palpable. People started talking to each other more. There was a new sense of community, a shared identity forged in the fires of bureaucratic warfare. The rebellion that started on my deck didn't end there. A week after the BBQ, a petition was circulated calling for a special election for the HOA board. It got more than enough signatures in a single weekend. Carol, it turned out, couldn't handle a world where she wasn't in charge. Faced with the certainty of a humiliating public ousting, she quietly submitted her resignation from the board and as head of the Architectural Review Committee. There was no farewell email, no dramatic final speech. She just vanished from public life. I still saw her white Lexus from time to time, but she never made eye contact. The dragon had been slain. Mr. Henderson, the voice of reason at the party, was overwhelmingly elected as the new HOA president. His first official act was to form a committee to review and simplify the bylaws, starting with the immediate approval of all colors of the rainbow for mailboxes and a declaration that garden gnomes of all sizes were welcome in Oakhaven. A new era of reason and logic had dawned. Tonight, a few months later, the air is cool and crisp. The sounds of the neighborhood are muted and peaceful. I'm sitting alone, submerged to my shoulders in the warm, bubbling water of my prescribed therapeutic hydrotherapy spa. A cold beer rests on the edge, and the soft glow of the string lights I've hung from the freestanding shade arbor illuminates the scene. My deck is no longer a battleground. It's a sanctuary. It's where I drink my morning coffee and where I unwind after a long day. It's a symbol. I look out over my kingdom of beige houses, the undisputed and benevolent master of my half-acre domain. I came to this neighborhood seeking a quiet life and accidentally ended up leading a suburban revolution. I didn't just build a deck, I liberated a community from a tyrant. And it all started because one woman thought the rules didn't apply to her. It all started because she couldn't be bothered to walk an extra 50 feet from a legal parking spot. Never, ever underestimate the extraordinary power of being just a little bit more stubborn than the person who is trying to ruin your day.